Roughly 50,000 years ago, somewhere on the ancient plains of Australia, a human being built a fire and cooked something over it. We know this happened, with real certainty, because that fire left evidence behind, scattered and buried, and waiting for tens of thousands of years to be found. What it cooked was an egg. Not a chicken's egg, not an emu's egg, but an egg the size of a melon, laid by a bird that stood 2 meters tall and weighed more than 3 grown men. One of the strangest and largest birds that has ever lived. That bird is gone now, extinct for around 47,000 years. And for a long time its death seemed like a solved case. A simple and rather damning story. The first people to reach Australia found these giant birds, plundered their nests, ate their enormous eggs, and drove the species into oblivion. It was a clean narrative, with a clear victim and a clear culprit. There was only one problem with it. Almost every part of that story turned out to be far less certain than it sounded, and unraveling it would take decades, threaten to collapse entirely, and finally be rescued by a technique that can read a message written in proteins 50,000 years old. This is not the story of a giant bird that was hunted to extinction. That story is a myth, or at least a guess dressed up as a fact. It is a genuine scientific mystery, still not fully solved, and it is far stranger and far more honest than the tidy version we told ourselves. Let's meet the bird, because it is remarkable in ways that have nothing to do with how it died. Its name is Genyornis newtoni, and it belonged to a family of giant flightless birds unique to Australia. Birds sometimes called mihirung, or thunderbirds. A full-grown Genyornis stood around 2 meters tall, weighed in excess of 200 kilograms, and carried a massive deep beak on a powerful neck, a genuinely imposing animal that strode across the Australian landscape during the Ice Age. That enormous beak has long puzzled scientists, who still argue over what it was for, whether it was the tool of a committed plant-eater cropping tough vegetation, or something more. And its exact diet remains one of the smaller open questions still clinging to this animal. And here is the first surprise. The first thing most people get wrong about it. Looking at it, you would assume it was some kind of giant emu or ostrich, a relative of the big flightless runners we know today. It was not. Genyornis and its thunderbird kin were not close relatives of the emu at all. Their nearest living relatives lie on a completely different branch of the bird family tree, the branch that leads to ducks, geese, and fowl. In other words, this 2-meter quarter-ton giant was, in evolutionary terms, closer to a duck than to an ostrich, a colossal, flightless, distant cousin of the water birds on your local pond. It is one of those facts that quietly rearranges how you see the whole animal, a reminder that evolution on an isolated continent does not respect the categories our intuition reaches for. It shared its world with the other Australian megafauna we have met before, the giant marsupials, and the strange reptilian predators, part of that same lost caste of giants that vanished around the same window of time. And when Genyornis disappeared, roughly 47,000 years ago, that disappearance fell suspiciously close to another event, the arrival, for the very first time, of human beings on the Australian continent. Two things happening at nearly the same moment: a giant bird vanishing, and people appearing. It is the kind of coincidence that practically demands a story, and science duly supplied one. The story was built almost entirely on eggshell, and it is worth understanding why, because the absence at the center of this case is as important as anything in it. If humans had hunted these giant birds to extinction, you would expect to find the evidence of that hunting, the kill sites, the butchered bones, the marks of stone tools on Genyornis skeletons. And that evidence, remarkably, is essentially not there. There are no confirmed sites of humans slaughtering adult Genyornis, no piles of bones bearing the cut marks of butchery. The direct case for hunting the bird itself simply does not exist. What exists instead is shell. Across many sites scattered around the continent, researchers found fragments of ancient, thick eggshell, and crucially, some of these fragments were burnt, scorched in a very particular way. The scientist most associated with this work, Gifford Miller, and his colleagues studied the burn patterns closely and argued that they were not the marks of a wildfire sweeping across the land, but something far more intimate, the localized, uneven burning you get when an egg is cooked in the embers of a campfire. The distinction is subtle but crucial. A wildfire burns eggshell fairly evenly, on both sides and at high temperature, while an egg set beside a small fire chars unevenly, gradient burned on one side and cooler on the other, and it was exactly that lopsided localized pattern they reported finding. Here, they argued, was the smoking gun. Not spears, not a chase, but breakfast. The picture they painted was of the first Australians finding the nests of these giant birds and doing the most natural thing in the world, harvesting the enormous, nutritious eggs and cooking them again and again across generations. And for a bird that likely bred slowly, as very large birds tend to, laying few eggs and investing heavily in each one, the steady loss of those eggs to human foragers could, in theory, have been enough. Take enough eggs for long enough, and a population stops replacing itself and slides quietly toward extinction without a single spear ever being thrown. It is a chillingly plausible mechanism. Extinction not by slaughter but by arithmetic, the slow subtraction of a future one meal at a time. It was an elegant and persuasive theory, and the entire thing rested on a single assumption that nobody had truly tested, that the burnt eggshells actually belonged to Genyornis. And in 2016, that assumption came under a challenge that threatened to bring the whole story crashing down. Another group of scientists looked hard at the eggshells everyone had been attributing to the giant bird, and they raised an objection that was uncomfortably difficult to dismiss. The shells, they pointed out, seemed wrong for Genyornis. They appeared too thin, and the eggs they came from too small, to have been laid by a bird weighing more than 200 kilograms. The proportions simply did not add up. If you scaled up from the eggshell, the bird that laid it should have been far smaller than the mighty Genyornis. This was not a trivial quibble. It was a careful, quantitative argument, the kind of objection that cannot simply be waved away, and it forced the whole field to confront an uncomfortable question it had never properly asked. So whose eggs were they? Their proposed answer was startling. The shells, they suggested, did not come from a giant thunderbird at all, but from a much smaller extinct animal called progera, a megapode, one of the mound-building birds, a creature perhaps only 5 to 7 kilograms in weight, closer to a large turkey than to a giant. And if that were true, the implications were enormous, because if the burnt eggshells belonged to a modest little megapode, then the central piece of evidence against humanity in the death of Genyornis simply dissolved. There would be no proof that people had ever eaten Genyornis eggs at all. It would absolve the first Australians of driving the giant bird extinct, and it would crack open an even more radical possibility, that Genyornis might have vanished for reasons that had nothing to do with people, perhaps even before humans arrived in the areas concerned. In one stroke, the accused could be exonerated, and the mystery thrown wide open again, the giant bird's death handed back to nature and the deep past. An entire narrative of extinction, taught and repeated for years, was now hanging by a thread, and the thread was the identity of a fragment of ancient shell. The case had reached a genuine impasse. To resolve it, you would need to determine, beyond doubt, which bird had actually laid those eggs. And the obvious tool for that job, the one we reach for whenever we want to identify the source of ancient biological material, was not available, because the Australian climate had already destroyed it. That tool is ancient DNA. In colder parts of the world, DNA can survive in bones and shells for tens of thousands of years, long enough to read and identify. But DNA is fragile, and heat is its enemy, and the Australian environment, warm and harsh over the long millennia, had degraded whatever genetic material these eggshells once held beyond any hope of recovery. The DNA was gone, and so, faced with a question they could not answer the usual way, the scientists turned to something more durable, and the technique they used is the quiet hero of this entire story. They turned to ancient proteins. Proteins, like DNA, carry a signature of the organism that made them, encoded in the specific sequence of their building blocks. And crucially, proteins can survive far longer than DNA, enduring in ancient material long after the genetic code has crumbled away. Where DNA is a long, delicate chain that shatters and scrambles with time and heat, certain proteins are far tougher, folded and bound into the very structure of a shell, and they can hold their sequence for far longer than the genetic material ever could. The field is called paleoproteomics, the reading of ancient proteins, and in 2022, a team applied it to the disputed eggshells. They extracted the surviving protein sequences preserved within the shell, sequences that had lasted some 50,000 years, and they compared them against the proteins of known birds, searching for a match. And the answer, when it came, was decisive. The proteins did not match a megapode. They matched the lineage of the giant thunderbirds. The shells were Genyornis after all. The 2016 challenge, for all its cleverness, was wrong. The eggs that early Australians had been cooking in their fires really had been laid by the giant bird. And the central pillar of the original story, that humans ate Genyornis eggs, was placed back on solid ground, this time confirmed not by an assumption, but by the durable molecular fingerprint of the bird itself, read across 500 centuries. Think about the strangeness of that for a moment. A fragment of a broken eggshell, cooked in a fire before the last ice age had even ended, still carrying inside it a legible signature of the creature that made it, waiting all that time for a technique that did not exist until our own century to finally read it. It is a genuinely beautiful piece of science, a mystery solved by reading a protein older than agriculture, older than art, older than almost anything humans have ever made. But here is where the honesty this story demands becomes essential, because it would be easy and wrong to end there with a triumphant conviction. Confirming that humans ate Genyornis eggs is not the same as proving that humans drove Genyornis extinct, and those two things must not be confused. The first is now well supported. The second remains one of the most genuinely open questions in Australian science, because the extinction of Australia's megafauna, the whole vanished caste of giants of which Genyornis was only one member, is the subject of a long and unresolved debate, and the two great suspects are not only humans, but climate. Australia over this period was drying and changing, its landscapes shifting, its water and vegetation transforming, and a substantial body of research argues that this climatic upheaval, rather than human activity, was the primary driver of the great extinctions, with some studies finding that the losses line up better with environmental change than with the timing of human arrival. This is not a fringe position or a technicality. It is a serious, well-argued alternative that a large part of the scientific community holds, and it means the confident sentence, "Humans killed the megafauna," cannot honestly be spoken as settled fact. The truth may well be some combination of the two, a population already under pressure from a harshening climate, pushed the rest of the way by the steady human harvesting of its eggs. And notice how careful the honest version of even the human side of this is. Eating eggs is not a crime, and it is not a mystery. It is one of the most ordinary things a foraging people can do, gathering a rich and available food from the landscape, exactly as human beings everywhere have always done. There is no villainy in it. If the loss of those eggs did contribute to the bird's decline, it was an unintended consequence unfolding over countless generations, invisible to the people living it, not a deliberate act of destruction. So the real state of our knowledge is this. We know, with the certainty of 50,000-year-old proteins, that the first Australians gathered and cooked the eggs of this giant bird. We do not know, and may never fully know, whether that is what ended it, or whether the changing climate would have doomed it regardless, with or without a single person ever setting foot on the continent. The clean story had a culprit and a conviction. The true story has a confirmed fact and a mystery still hanging over it. And the mystery is the more honest and the more interesting of the two. And there is one more layer to this, the most human layer of all, and it has to be handled with care and with respect. For thousands of years, the first peoples of Australia shared their continent with these giant birds. This was not a brief overlap. It was a long coexistence. Generations of people living alongside 2-meter thunderbirds, striding across the plains. A relationship we can barely imagine and can only glimpse through fragments. For those people, Genyornis was not a fossil or a museum reconstruction. It was simply an animal that was there, a familiar giant of the landscape, as ordinary to them as a kangaroo, and every bit as real. And there is a genuinely extraordinary possibility that some memory of that coexistence may have survived, carried not in stone or bone but in story. Among certain Aboriginal traditions, there are accounts of enormous birds, and some researchers have pointed in particular to traditions recorded from the Chapurung people, which appear to describe the hunting of a giant bird in the deep past. In a landscape being shaped by volcanic activity, that geology can actually date. If those traditions genuinely preserve a memory of the Mehirum, then they would represent something almost incomprehensible. An oral record passed down, mouth to mouth, across a span of time so vast it dwarfs all of written history. A story kept alive for tens of thousands of years, passed down an unbroken chain of storytellers far longer than all of recorded history laid end to end, reaching back toward the very edge of human memory itself. It must be said clearly that this is debated and uncertain, and not something to be stated as fact. But it is a real and serious possibility, raised by serious people. And it is the kind of thread that transforms this from a story about bones into a story about memory. The giant bird may not be entirely gone after all. It may still exist, faintly, as one of the oldest stories the human species has ever told. So look at what we are really left with, because it is so much richer than the title we started with. We wanted a simple tale. The first people came, they hunted the giant bird, they wiped it out, and almost every piece of that turned out to be more complicated and more honest than we assumed. There was no hunting of the bird that we can find, only the gathering of its eggs. The eggs themselves were doubted, nearly reassigned to a different animal entirely, and rescued only by reading proteins older than civilization. And whether any of it actually caused the extinction, or whether a changing climate was the true killer, remains genuinely unknown. Genyornis is not a closed case. It is a mystery we are still solving. A giant bird we are still learning to see clearly. Its death still argued over in laboratories today, longer dead than our species has been telling stories, and still refusing to give up its final secret. That is the real gift of it, and the real lesson, that the confident, satisfying story is so often not the true one, and that the truth, when you actually dig for it, tends to be stranger, humbler, and far more alive. And it raises a haunting question about all the birds this continent has lost, and nearly lost. Because Genyornis is genuinely, permanently gone. Its story ended tens of thousands of years ago. But not every Australian bird written off as vanished has actually stayed vanished. There is one, a small, secretive, ground-dwelling bird of the outback night that science declared extinct and mourned as lost for the better part of a century. Given up completely, spoken of only in the past tense. And then, against all odds and all expectation, someone found it, alive. They call it the night parrot, and how it came back from the dead is a mystery of a completely different kind.